The antiseptic smell of the ER clung to my scrubs. I needed sleep, but Chloe was already inside. "We're renovating your childhood room for the baby," my sister said, standing in my doorway with paint samples. I was 28, still living at home, paying $2,400 monthly rent to my parents. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" I asked. Dad shrugged. "Figure it out. Family expands." I moved out that night. When the contractor arrived the next day, he asked, "Who's paying?" "The invoice is $34,000. That moment played in my head like a loop tape. I looked at Chloe's hands, holding swatches of soft sage and warm oatmeal, fanning them out like a show host. She didn't see April, the nurse who covered the utilities. She saw square footage. My uniform pants were unbuttoned, my shirt tossed on a chair. I smelled like wet ash from a trauma intake, a burned story that wouldn't wash out. Chloe just smiled, oblivious to the grime on my skin or the sudden silence. I looked past her, to where Dad stood holding his coffee mug. He wore his habitual expression of being too tired for feelings. Mom hovered behind him, trying to look supportive, while pretending she wasn't part of the ambush. For the past year, they claimed they were helping me save. But that rent check felt like a bruise every time I paid it. Dad took a sip of coffee, treating my displacement like a discussion about the weather. It wasn't an eviction, it was a quiet erasure. Something inside my chest snapped. It wasn't loud or cinematic, just a quiet click like a deadbolt sliding home. I didn't argue or beg. My knees felt stiff from hauling patience. But my mind suddenly cleared. I walked past Chloe and opened the linen closet, pulling out the duffel tucked behind old towels. Mom's voice sharpened, asking what I was doing, but I ignored her. I packed jeans and socks without ceremony. My boots were at the station, but everything else I owned fit in that bag. "Don't be dramatic." Chloe laughed nervously, clutching samples like weapons. "We're just talking." I zipped the duffel. Dad didn't set his mug down. He watched me with a half-shrug, as if my departure was a minor inconvenience, rather than the loss of his daughter. I realized then that they didn't feel bad. They just felt annoyed. I walked out the front door, my boots thudding on the steps. The night air was cold and clean against my face. It felt like stepping out of a burning building. I slept on a friend's couch, waking up to my phone vibrating on the floor. It was an unknown number. "Hello." I answered, voice groggy. That was when the contractor, a man named Brad, delivered the punchline to my family's joke. "Contract says full demo starts today," he said cheerfully. My stomach dropped. I hadn't signed anything, but as Brad listed off the costs, the drywall, and the labor, a terrible, icy realization washed over me. They weren't just kicking me out. They were making me pay for it. I sat up on the unfamiliar couch, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Sunlight cut through the blinds, stinging my eyes. "Brad?" I said, my voice cracking from sleep and stress. "Slow down." "What contract?" The man on the other end chuckled, a sound that grated against my headache. "The nursery renovation," he said, as if explaining gravity to a toddler. "Full demo, new drywall, electrical, flooring. It's a really cute design, by the way." My blood ran cold. I swung my legs onto the floor, the cold wood shocking me fully awake. "Whose name is on that contract?" I asked, dread coiling in my stomach. There was a pause, the rustle of paper shuffling on his end. April Carter. Brad read out. That is you, right? My mouth went dry, tasting of stale fear. Yes, I whispered. That's me. But I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't even agreed to the paint color, let alone a structural renovation. Brad exhaled, his cheerfulness dampening slightly. Look, it's got your electronic signature. Sent from your email address last night. My fingers tightened around the phone case until my knuckles turned white. My email? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Yeah, aprilcarterrn@gmail. That was my primary account. The one I used for shift swaps, HR paperwork, and sensitive patient data. It was the digital key to my entire life, and someone had just turned the lock. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. 2 weeks ago, I had used my parents' ancient desktop to print benefits paperwork. My mom had hovered, helpful and attentive, watching me type my password. Save it for next time, she had suggested, clicking the prompt before I could stop her. I had thought nothing of it then. It was just Mom being efficient. Now, that memory felt like watching a thief memorize the code to a safe. So, here is the issue, Brad continued, oblivious to my internal collapse. The deposit was supposed to process this morning, but it bounced. My heart hammered against my ribs. Bounced? I echoed. I'm standing here with a crew and materials, he said, his tone sharpening into professional annoyance. We tried to run the card on file for $8,500. It declined. He waited, expecting me to be embarrassed. Instead, a wave of dizzying relief washed over me. I pulled the phone away from my ear and opened my banking app. There it was. A pending transaction for $8,500 from Northridge Renovations, flagged in red. Declined suspicious activity. My bank's fraud detection algorithm was the only entity in my life that had decided to protect me. My parents hadn't just evicted me. They had tried to drain my savings before I even woke up. They wanted the room, the renovation, and my money to pay for it all. I put the phone back to my ear, my voice steadying into the tone I used when a patient was coding. Brad, listen to me carefully, I said. Do not start any work. Do not touch a single wall. Miss Carter, the schedule, he began. I didn't sign that contract. I cut in. I am on my way. I hung up. The nausea hit me harder than any ER trauma. This wasn't a mistake. It was a haste. The drive took 12 minutes. But my pulse made it feel like seconds. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands cramped, replaying the phone call. Identity theft. The words tasted like bile. When I turned onto the driveway, the sight stopped my breath. A white truck emblazoned with Northridge Renovations sat idling. 2 men in work boots leaned against the tailgate, drinking coffee. They looked relaxed, ready to tear apart my sanctuary. My parents' front door was wide open, inviting the destruction in. I slammed my car door hard, the sound cracking through the suburban quiet. Brad looked up from his clipboard, his expression shifting from annoyance to wariness. I didn't stop to greet him. I walked straight past him into the house. In the kitchen, Mom was pouring orange juice, while Chloe sat at the island, scrolling on her phone. They looked like a magazine spread of domestic bliss. Mom looked up, her smile faltering only slightly. April. We weren't expecting you until later. Why is there a contractor outside with a $34,000 invoice in my name? I asked, my voice trembling. Chloe didn't even look up from her screen. God, keep your voice down, she muttered. The neighbors have windows. Mom wiped her hands on a dish towel, her movements slow and deliberate. It's just a renovation, sweetie. We needed to get it started for the baby. You know how tight the timeline is. She spoke as if I were overreacting to spilled milk. I pulled my phone out and thrust the screen toward them. The angry red text of the declined transaction glowed accusingly. You tried to charge $8,000 to my card? I said. That is a felony. Mom waved a hand dismissively, turning back to the counter. We're a family, April. We pool resources. We just needed to get the deposit down. She said it so casually. Pool resources. I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You evicted me and then robbed me. Chloe finally slammed her phone down. You are being so selfish, she snapped, her eyes wet with sudden, weaponized tears. I am pregnant. I need a nursery. You have a job, you have money. Why is it such a big deal? She looked at me with genuine confusion, as if my bank account was a public utility she was entitled to access. I didn't agree to this, I said. I didn't sign anything. Chloe rolled her eyes. It's for the baby. Heavy footsteps sounded from the hallway. Dad appeared, wearing his bathrobe and holding the newspaper, looking annoyed by the noise. What is all this shouting? He demanded, glaring at me. I told you to figure it out. Not come back here and cause a scene. I pointed at the window. They forged my signature, Dad. On a $34,000 contract. He shrugged, the same gesture from yesterday. We raised you. You owe us. Stop counting pennies when your sister needs support. The screen door creaked open behind me. We all froze. Brad stood there, holding a laser measure, looking uncomfortable. Folks, he said. I need to know if we're doing this. The meter is running. I looked at my family, waiting for shame to hit them. It didn't. Chloe let out a huff of pure frustration. See. She hissed at me, gesturing wildly at the contractor. Now you are embarrassing us. Just give him the card so he can start. I turned my back on my sister's outstretched hand and walked onto the porch. The morning air felt crisp. A sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the kitchen. Brad watched me, his brows knit together in confusion. I did not authorize this renovation, I said, my voice projecting clearly, so the crew by the truck could hear. My name was used without my consent. If you touch this house, you are liable. Brad didn't hesitate. He snapped his notebook shut. Pack it up, guys, he yelled. The sound of the contractor's truck engine starting was the only victory I would get. Inside, the atmosphere shifted instantly from annoyance to panic. Chloe burst onto the porch, her face splotchy with rage. Are you happy? She screamed, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. You just humiliated us in front of the neighbors. I shook her off, stepping down onto the damp lawn. I saved myself $34,000, I said. Dad appeared in the doorway, his bathrobe flapping like a broken wing. Get inside, he commanded. I stayed planted on the grass, refusing to cross the threshold. No, I said. It was the first time I had ever said that word to him, without qualifying it or apologizing. Dad's face reddened, his authority fracturing in the sunlight. You live under my roof, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. You follow my rules. You pay your share. I don't live here, I corrected him, feeling a cold power rising. You kicked me out yesterday. Remember, family expands. Figure it out. Mom pushed past Dad, descending the concrete steps with her hands clasped in prayer. April, stop this, she pleaded, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, meant to guilt, not comfort. Think about the baby. Chloe needs this stress to go away. She reached for me, the scent of her vanilla perfume, suddenly nauseating. The baby isn't the one paying the bills, Mom. I am. She looked at me with wide, wet eyes. Money is just paper. Family is forever. Just fix this with Brad. I am fixing it, I said, pulling my phone out again. The screen glared in the sun. I'm looking at the recurring transfers scheduled for the first of the month. Rent. Mom froze, her eyes tracking the device like it was a weapon. Don't, she warned, the sweetness evaporating instantly. We count on that money. For the mortgage? I asked, my thumb hovering over the cancel button. Or for renovations you can't afford. I tapped cancel series. The confirmation popped up green and bright. It's done. Mom let out a strangled sound, like she had been physically struck in the gut. We already spent it, she whispered, the confession slipping out before she could catch it. The air around us seemed to freeze. What? I asked, my stomach twisting. The transfer wasn't due for 3 days. Dad looked away, studying the siding. Credit cards, Mom mumbled, wringing her hands. We put the deposit on credit, assuming your rent would cover the payment. April, you have to turn it back on. I looked at them. My father refusing to meet my eyes, my mother trembling over a credit card bill. My sister pouting about paint samples. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a revenue stream that had suddenly dried up. I am not your retirement plan, I said quietly, and I am not your emergency fund. I turned toward my car, leaving them standing on the lawn. Figure it out. I called back over my shoulder, opening my door. Family expands. I drove until the manicured lawns of my parents' neighborhood faded into city blocks. The "For rent" sign was taped to a brick building that smelled of old garlic and rain. The landlord, a man with grease under his fingernails, didn't ask for references. He just wanted the first month's cash. The studio was a shoebox compared to my old room. The carpet was worn thin, revealing floorboards like ribs. But when I locked the deadbolt, the silence was absolute. It was the first time I bought silence that actually belonged to me. I sat on the floor with my laptop, the screen glow illuminating the empty room. My first target was the email account. I changed the password from the one my mother knew to a random string of alphanumeric chaos. Next came the bank. I requested new cards and disputed the authorized user status my father had apparently granted himself years ago. Every click felt like cutting a wire on a bomb. I was severing the invisible tethers they used to pull me back. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts from Chloe, but I didn't look. I didn't stop at the big things. I went through the streaming services, the online shopping accounts, even the pharmacy login. I logged out of all devices. The list of active sessions was nauseating. Dad's iPad, living room television, Chloe's iPhone. They were all there, leeching off my subscriptions while telling me I wasn't doing enough. I hit sane out all with a vindictive jab of my finger. The digital silence soon matched the physical one. I was finally alone in the cloud, ghosting my own family to save myself. Then I pulled my full credit report. I expected to see the recent hard inquiry from Northridge Renovations. It was there, glaring and recent. But scrolling down, I found ghosts I hadn't invited. A cable bill in my name from 3 years ago, unpaid and sent to collections. A credit card opened when I was in nursing school, maxed out and closed. The limits were small, under $1,000, but the damage was real. They had been chipping away at my financial foundation for years, testing the structural integrity of my credit score. I stared at the screen until the lines blurred. This wasn't just about the nursery or the baby. This was systemic. They treated my identity like a communal resource, a spare key they used whenever their own doors wouldn't open. The cable bill dated back to a time Dad claimed he was handling things while between jobs. I remembered thanking him for shielding me from the stress. I felt sick. I hadn't been shielded. I had been used as the shield. The betrayal wasn't an event, it was a habit. My phone rang again, cutting through the hum of the refrigerator. I expected Mom's ringtone, but the screen showed a local municipal number. I answered, my throat tight. "Miss Carter. This is Officer Ramirez," a calm voice said. "I am following up on the identity theft report you filed online." My hand shook as I held the phone. "Yes," I said. That was me. "We have reviewed the documentation regarding the contractor," he continued. "We need to verify if you want to pursue criminal charges against the individuals involved." The question hung in the empty apartment like smoke. The individuals involved weren't strangers in a dark room. They were the people who taught me to tie my shoes. "Miss Carter." Ramirez pressed gently. "If this was a familial dispute, we can close the file." I looked at the credit report again, at the cable bill, at the maxed out card from nursing school. I saw the hard inquiry for the renovation. It wasn't a dispute, I said, my voice hardening into something unrecognizable. It was theft. "I want to proceed." The detective's voice was a flat line against the chaos of my shift. Ramirez had dug deeper than the renovation contract, unearthing a timeline of financial erosion that spanned years. "We found 3 other credit cards opened in your name, Miss Carter," he said, the paper shuffling loud in my ear. "One was used for a timeshare presentation in Florida 4 years ago." I closed my eyes, leaning against the nurse's station counter. The dates lined up perfectly with my nursing school finals. They hadn't just stolen money. They had bet against my future while I was busy building it. I hung up and tried to focus on the triage board, but the numbers blurred into angry red lines. My patients had broken bones and failing hearts. Injuries I could understand and treat with protocols. The wound my family had inflicted was invisible and festering, resisting every attempt at closure. I checked my vitals monitor out of habit. My heart rate was resting at a steady drumbeat of panic. I needed to be the professional, the calm in the storm. But inside, I was the building collapsing in slow motion. Then, the double doors slid open. My mother didn't belong in the sterile, fluorescent glare of the emergency department. She wore her Sunday best, a pastel cardigan that clashed with the blood and betadine aesthetic of the trauma bay. She scanned the room with the frantic energy of a bird trapped in a garage until her eyes locked on me. "April," she called out, her voice pitching up to a register designed to garner sympathy. Heads turned. Security guards shifted their weight. I froze. my clipboard pressed against my chest like armor. She wasn't here for medical attention. She was here for an extraction. She rushed the desk, ignoring the authorized personnel only sign on the floor. You won't answer your phone, she accused, breathless and flushed. We have been worried sick. I stepped back, putting the high counter between us. I am working, Mom. You cannot be back here. She reached across the laminate, her fingers scrabbling for my arm. The police called the house, April. They want to interview your father. Do you have any idea what you have done? Her grief was a weapon, sharpened by the audience of sick people watching us. I didn't do anything, I said, keeping my voice low and controlled. You committed fraud. The police are just doing their job. Mom let out a sob that sounded practiced, echoing off the linoleum. It's a misunderstanding. You are going to send your father to jail over a nursery. Chloe is hysterical. Her blood pressure is through the roof because of you. She made sure the waiting room heard that part. A woman in a wheelchair glared at me. The narrative was shifting. In their eyes, I wasn't the victim, I was the ungrateful child. Mom leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You need to call Officer Ramirez right now. Tell him you forgot you authorized it. Tell him it was a verbal agreement. I stared at her, seeing the desperation etched into her foundation. She didn't care about the truth. She only cared about the optics. You want me to lie to the police? I asked. You want me to commit a crime to cover up yours? She squeezed her eyes shut. I want you to be a daughter, she hissed. For once in your life. She reached for my hand again, her grip surprisingly painful, digging her nails into my wrist. Come outside, she demanded. We are going to call him together. I tried to pull away, but she held on, anchoring me to her mess. Suddenly, a large hand clamped down on the counter. Is there a problem here, Nurse Carter? Dr. Evans stood beside me. His white coat a stark contrast to Mom's pastel manipulation. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on my mother's hand on my wrist. It was a cold, clinical stare. Mom released me instantly, smoothing her cardigan, as if she hadn't just been assaulting a staff member. I am her mother, she said, flashing a charming, wavering smile. We're just having a family discussion. Dr. Evans didn't smile back. This is a secure area, ma'am. You are interfering with patient care. His voice was flat, devoid of the deference she expected. If you are not a patient, you need to leave. Now. Or I will have security escort you out. He stepped between us, a physical wall of medical authority blocking her access. I watched her face crumble from indignation to shock. She wasn't used to men who couldn't be charmed or guilted. She looked small, petty, and incredibly dangerous. Dr. Evans glanced at me, his eyes scanning my face for signs of damage. Do you need 5 minutes? He asked softly. In his concern, I saw the reflection of what was actually happening. This wasn't a mother fighting for her family. This was a predator cornered in a trap of her own making. The realization washed over me like ice water. Mom glared at Dr. Evans. Then shot a look of pure venom at me. You are destroying us, she mouthed, backing away toward the automatic doors. She turned and fled, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm of retreat. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of rubbing alcohol and latex. It smelled like safety. I am okay, I told Dr. Evans, and for the first time in weeks, I meant it. I don't need 5 minutes. I picked up my clipboard. My shift wasn't over, but my role as their victim finally was. 2 weeks later, the phone rang in my quiet apartment. It was Ramirez. The district attorney was moving forward. It wasn't just a dispute anymore. It was identity theft and wire fraud on a scale that mandated prosecution. My parents weren't just looking at fines. They were looking at potential prison time. The gravity of it settled in my stomach like lead. I sat in my small apartment, watching dust motes dance in the sun, and realized I had pulled the trigger. The bullet was finally hitting the target. My phone lit up moments later. Chloe's name flashed like a warning light. I answered, bracing for impact. "They're arresting Dad," she screamed, the sound distorting over the speaker. "Police are at the house right now. The neighbors are watching." Her voice was a siren of pure panic. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't apologize for the theft. She only cared that the picture, perfect facade, was cracking. "You did this," she sobbed. "You sent the police to our door." "I can't handle this stress," Chloe continued, hyperventilating. "My blood pressure is up." "Do you want me to lose the baby? Is that what you want?" She wielded her pregnancy like a shield, expecting me to lower my sword. But the blade was already broken. "I didn't steal $34,000, I said calmly. "I didn't forge signatures." Chloe choked on a sob. "It's just money, April. We would have paid you back eventually. Why do you have to be so cruel?" Then came the pivot. The tearful demand that proved nothing had changed. "Mom says we need $5,000 for a retainer." Chloe sniffled. "And bail might be set tomorrow. You have savings. You need to transfer it." The audacity took my breath away. They were being arrested for stealing from me, and their solution was to ask me to fund their defense. "No," I said. The word felt heavy and solid, a stone dropping into a deep well. "I am not paying for their defense." "You are a monster," Chloe hissed. "Mom was right. You don't care about anyone but yourself. You are going to let Dad sit in a cell." I looked around my studio apartment. It was sparse, paid for with honest hours and exhaustion. "Dad chose his cell when he signed my name," I said. "And you chose yours when you asked for the renovation." The line went dead. She hung up. But the silence she left behind wasn't empty. It was filled with clarity. An hour later, a text came through. It was from Dad. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You are dead to us," it read. "Don't come to the funeral when I die. You aren't my daughter." There were no typos, no hesitation. It was written with the same steady hand that had forged my signature on the contract. It was meant to destroy me, to crush me under the weight of his rejection. Instead, I felt something else. I deleted the thread. I blocked the number. The grief was there, sharp and stinging, but it was an old grief. I was mourning a father who hadn't existed for years, maybe never. The man who texted me wasn't a father. He was a debtor, angry that his line of credit had been cut. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The city moved on, indifferent to my family's implosion. The world hadn't ended. In fact, it was just starting. The DA's assistant called to confirm my statement for the grand jury. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Family cases are difficult. Victims often recant." I thought about Chloe's scream. I thought about Dad's text. I thought about the years of Borrowing. That was really just taking. If I recanted now, I would be signing a contract for the rest of my life. I would be their servant forever. I am sure, I said. Proceed with the charges. That evening, I sat down with a glass of cheap wine and opened my laptop. I removed my emergency contact info from the hospital database. I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy from Frank and Marie Carter to a local animal shelter. It was a petty, bureaucratic task, but it felt like surgery. I was excising the last bits of necrotic tissue. They could not reach me if I was sick. They would not profit if I died. I was free. The sun went down, casting long shadows across my floor. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark and listened to the silence. It wasn't lonely. It was protective. The bridge back to them was not just burned. The canyon it spanned had widened, until I couldn't even see them on the other side. I was an orphan of my own making, and for the first time in 28 years, I was safe. I finally closed my eyes and slept. 6 months later, I woke up to sunlight filtering through curtains I chose. The walls were no longer bare drywall. They were a deep, calming navy blue. It was the exact opposite of the soft sage Chloe had waved in my face. I stretched, listening to the city hum. No shouting matches. No passive-aggressive sighs. No pounding on the door. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like oxygen. I made coffee in a kitchen that smelled only of roasted beans, not guilt. I sat at my table and opened my banking app. The ritual once induced nausea, a daily check to see what had been drained. Now, the numbers were boring and beautiful. My savings account was growing, stacking like bricks in a wall no one could breach. There were no pending transactions from Northridge renovations. No rent transfers disappearing into a black hole. I had full control. My credit score was climbing out of the pit they dug. It was just a number, but today it felt like armor. My phone buzzed, but I didn't flinch. It wasn't a demand for bail or a guilt trip about the baby. It was a text from Sarah, a fellow nurse. Brunch in an hour. I am buying. I smiled, typing back a yes. I had spent so long believing I was a resource to be mined that I forgot what it was like to be a friend. The people in my life now didn't want my money. They wanted my company. I was learning love wasn't a transaction. It was voluntary. I walked to the mirror. The face staring back looked younger, the dark circles finally fading. I thought about Dad standing in the kitchen, shrugging his shoulders. Figure it out, he had said. Family expands. He meant it as a dismissal. A way to shrink me down to make room for Chloe. But he was accidentally right. Family did expand. It just didn't have to include the people who shared your DNA. It expanded to include the people who respected you. It expanded once you removed the parasites. The legal battle wasn't fully over. Dad was facing probation, but that was his weight to carry, not mine. I hadn't spoken to them since the arrest. Sometimes, late at night, I felt the phantom limb of their absence. It was a dull ache where a sister and mother used to be. But then I remembered the credit card applications and the forged signature. The ache was better than the gangrene. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The lock clicked shut with a solid, reassuring sound. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the city air smelling of sweet possibility. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was finally living. I had a home no one could take away. I had money that stayed in my account. I had a future that belonged entirely to me. I looked up at the sky, feeling light enough to float. I had figured it out, just like he asked. I had expanded my life by subtracting them from it. I walked toward the cafe, finally ready to take my seat.